If ever there was a franchise that should have never become a franchise. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be ranking the 6 films of the Exorcist franchise as part of my franchise Rankography series. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content, like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. So what is a Rankography exactly? Well, it's my ranking of a filmography, whether that be a director's output, an actor's appearances, or even an entire franchise. My rankographies are based on personal preference, and I rank movies according to how much I enjoyed them, rather than any specific technical merit or attribute. Remember, this is just my ranking, not the ranking, so be sure to post your own personal ranking of the Exorcist franchise in the comments below. Sometimes rankographies are hard, because all the movies in the franchise are so good that you just can't decide on the placement, and can't bear to put such a good movie in the lowest spot. Sometimes rankographies are tough because so many of the films are just okay, and it's hard to come up with reasoning to place one higher on the list than another. But every now and then you encounter a rankography that's challenging because of how awful so many of the films are. The Exorcist series is that type of franchise. There's a clear standout, and a few movies that are decent, but it's rare for me to come across a franchise where I actively dislike half of the installments. This franchise sports a huge range in quality, but it just keeps coming back, even after 50 years. Seems like Pazuzu's not the only one to do that. I've already reviewed all 6 of these movies on this channel, so if you want to check those out for some more in-depth thoughts on each of them, I'll put links in the description below, and also link some of them up in the cards as we go along. Alright, let's get this rankography started. Coming in at number 6, Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist. To be fair, it's a bit of a toss-up for which of these movies deserves to be in the bottom spot. It cycles for me, and these lowest 3 films could all be at the bottom, depending on the day. If I could, I'd put all of them at number 6 and just skip spots 5 and 4 altogether. Dominion is one of the 2 prequels in this franchise, a situation that's more interesting than both of the films combined. Both Dominion and Exorcist: The Beginning tell essentially the same story and star Stellan Skarsgård as a younger Father Merrin, but 2 different directors resulted in 2 very different versions for what's otherwise basically the same film. Dominion was directed by Paul Schrader and was the first of the 2 prequels filmed, but was the second released after the studio's lack of confidence in it resulted in its shelving. Because of this odd scenario, I saw Exorcist: The Beginning first, which admittedly probably put this one at a bit of a disadvantage due to the deja vu quality of it all. The concept of an Exorcist prequel is one that I think had some potential. A story that set up Father Merrin as a character and showed us his first encounter with Pazuzu sounds pretty interesting, but unfortunately Dominion squandered the idea by devoting much of the film's runtime and focus to other random plot threads, essentially sidelining most of the Exorcist connected components. Like the other prequel, Dominion's got some atrocious CGI. There are fewer hyena scenes here, but the ones that exist are brightly lit, which certainly doesn't help hide the poor quality. It's too bad this didn't have an interesting story or characters to distract us, or even any jump scares to get the pulse going a bit. Instead, we've got the Exorcist cure for insomnia. Coming in at number 5, Exorcist II: The Heretic. This is without question one of the biggest first to second movie downgrades in film history. So you might be wondering, why isn't this number 6 in the ranking? Well, depending on the day, it sometimes is for me, but this film has got a handful of pieces that make it a bit more interesting than the snooze fest that is Dominion. In terms of genuinely positive aspects, Ennio Morricone's score is this movie's only saving grace, but the film does attempt something with its story. It tries to connect directly to its predecessor by focusing on Regan dealing with her buried childhood trauma. It introduces some interesting ideas with its supernatural-laced shift to psychic elements, but goes off the rails during the second act, devolving into a jumbled mess of story ideas without an easily identifiable plot through line. Exorcist II is an incoherent and frequently incomprehensible film, and a bizarre redirect from its predecessor. Nearly everything that was good about the first Exorcist film is countered by the exact opposite here. The tension and heavy atmosphere of the first are replaced by a frenetic fever dream that somehow manages to grow boring amidst the chaos. The four great performances of the first are replaced by what can only be referred to as uneven performances in the sequel. Linda Blair does her best with the weak material she's given, but Louise Fletcher and especially Richard Burton are incredibly rough. Burton's performances always come across a bit theatrical, but his melodramatic overacting here is just silly. And that's saying something in a movie with multiple shots of a poorly crafted locust flying in slow motion. Coming in at number 4, Exorcist: The Beginning. As the other prequel in the franchise, Rennie Harlin's version was the second filmed but first released. It's a bizarre scenario, but after Paul Schrader completed his Dominion version, the studio was, understandably, not confident in it, and tapped Harlan to make a more horror-tinged version. Once again, Stellan Skarsgård stars as Father Merrin, and the basic story remains the same, so there's some serious deja vu in watching the two prequels. At the very least, they offer an interesting case study for a film school class. Exorcist: The Beginning is not good, but it's marginally better than Dominion. Again, the idea of an Exorcist prequel held some real potential. It's just too bad it was botched twice. Most of the criticisms I had for Dominion hold true for this film as well, which makes sense, I suppose, considering they're basically the same movie. Once again, the focus is a big issue, with the film turning its attention to random plot beats, rather than concentrating on Father Merrin and Pazuzu as set up for the 1973 film. There are even more hyenas in this version of the prequel, and the CGI is about as poor, but at least they had the forethought to set most of the scenes at night to hide the quality of it. The pacing is bad, but not quite as dull as Dominion, which helps put it on top. It's got more action, and is even a bit adventure-tinged during the first act, with plenty of jump scares to keep you awake. It's also the goriest film of the franchise, falling more into the gross-out horror territory than any of the other movies. Coming in at number 3, The Exorcist: Believer. Although not a great movie, there's a huge gap between this film and the number 4 slot on this list. It's the first movie in this ranking that I don't dislike. It's not a favorite of mine, but I thought it was okay. Fresh off his Halloween trilogy, David Gordon Green has set his sights on another classic horror film in order to give it the legacy sequel treatment. The first of a planned trilogy, Believer is set 50 years after the first film, and sees the return of Pazuzu, some classic characters, and the familiar exorcism story. As a legacy sequel, it definitely plays on nostalgia, but I don't think it does so as effectively as Halloween 2018, for instance. The nostalgia elements aren't as interwoven or integral to the story, so at times, Believer does feel like a random possession movie that was given an Exorcist paint job partway through development. Everything here feels very familiar, which makes sense, not only because it is a legacy sequel, but also because there are only so many things you can do with an exorcism film. That said, Believer does feature some interesting new elements. The simultaneous possession and exorcism is pretty cool, and the multicultural, multi-faith aspects of the exorcism itself give everything a slightly different flavor. The themes feel a bit preachy, and the constant jump scares prevent the film from building much tension or atmosphere, but it does feature some nice practical makeup effects that are reminiscent of the original film. The storyline and reintroduction of characters feels a bit underdeveloped, but out of all of the sequels and prequels in the franchise, this one feels the most like the first film. Coming in at number 2, The Exorcist 3. The Exorcist franchise is such a chaotic series that it's tough to point to any one of the films and call it the outlier. But if I had to pick one outlier, apart from the first film I suppose, it would be this third installment. A 15 years later sequel to the first film, this movie completely ignores the events of Exorcist 2, focusing on a recast Detective Kinderman and Father Dyer. It's set in Georgetown and has its roots planted in the events of the first film, but definitely tells its own story. This is not just another exorcism movie. In fact, for most of the runtime, it's actually a police procedural, centering on Kinderman's investigation into a grisly serial killer case, complete with an overarching mystery and a dark, foreboding atmosphere. George C. Scott gives a good, quickly escalating performance, and Brad Dourif delivers some chillingly memorable monologues. The film never really tries to be scary, but it's definitely got some creepy stuff sprinkled in there, not to mention a few very effective jump scares. The Exorcist 3 was directed by author of The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty, and was based on his sequel novel, Legion. Unfortunately, the studio wasn't sold on the slightly more subdued ending of his book, and forced reshoots of the third act for the film version. While the heightened supernatural elements and absurd moments are entertaining, this studio interference resulted in a very sudden stylistic and tonal shift that make it feel like two completely different movies were spliced together. The third act definitely hurts the film a bit, but I still think it was a really interesting idea to take a police procedural mystery thriller and intertwine it with supernatural horror. So that means my number one Exorcist film is The Exorcist. Usually, the reveal of the number one film is the most exciting part of a rankography, but I suspect it might be the least interesting placement in this particular case. I mean, obviously, the 1973 original was gonna take the top spot. No question about that with this particular franchise. Not only is it the highest quality film of the bunch, but it's also the most effective at telling its story. The Exorcist is frequently cited as the scariest movie ever made. I've never personally thought of it as scary in any sort of traditional sense, but it's certainly uncomfortable, shocking, and at times off-putting. It's a bit of a slow burn and takes over an hour to really start getting creepy, but the gradual buildup of tension and chills is just so effective. Unlike many of the other films in this franchise, the lead performances here are all fantastic. Max von Sydow in startlingly good old age makeup, Jason Miller nabbing an Oscar nomination for his very first acting role, Ellen Burstyn giving her all as a mother desperately trying to save her daughter, and of course, 13-year-old Linda Blair with her memorable performance as Regan. In addition to the performances, the technical elements of this film really shine. The makeup and practical effects are still impressive and unsettling 50 years later. And then there's the lighting, the framing of shots, the minimal but iconic score, and more that all come together to make a film that's earned its influential place in the cinematic and horror history books. Alright, so that's my rankography of the Exorcist franchise. 50 years, 6 films, and one very persistent demon. What does your ranking look like? I'd love to see some reasoning for your order, so be sure to post it in the comments below. Remember, I've already reviewed all 6 of these movies, so you could check those videos out if you want some more in-depth discussion of each, as well as my ratings, pros and cons, and even tailored film recommendations. And if you're interested in buying any of these movies, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this rankography, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.